Welcome to the Verification and Identification and Resolution of 2017-18 Conflicting Information General Session. Now, please welcome to the stage Carney McCullough, Director of the Policy Development Group for the Office of Post-Secondary Education, and Craig Munoz, Assistant Director, Policy Liaison and Implementation, Federal Student Aid.
Good morning, everybody. Wow, this is a big room. You're spread out all different directions there, so we'll try to look to both sides. Well, thank you very much for joining us for another general session this morning. We've kind of got back-to-back general sessions, and I appreciate you all being here so very much. I'm going to cover the verification portion of our program, and then I'm going to turn it over to Craig, who's going to talk more about the conflicting information. This is just sort of an agenda of the items I'm going to go through. We'll talk a little bit about verification history, moving on to 2017-18 verification, which to us, oddly enough, seems like really old news because we're already beginning to, think about future years, and then 18-19 verification, and then what I always refer to as verification hot topics. So things, some are for 17-18, some are for 18-19, but try to go over a few of those things for you. A little bit about the verification history, and I'm not going to spend forever talking about this. Sometimes I've really, belabored the point of sort of the history of verification. I guess it's because I've been around so long. But we did change our regulations back in 2010. We issued the program integrity regulations. They were effective for the 2012-2013 award year. And when we revised those regulations, what we were really trying to do is to move to a more customized verification process, to give ourselves the flexibility to do that. So as part of that, some of the things you've seen over the last 6 years is we've added the concept of verification groups, groups of items that individual students should verify as opposed to everybody verifying everything. So we've added that concept. And you've also noticed that we have added and deleted data elements over this period of time. Sort of as we said, we wanted to be able to customize and react to things. And so, you've noticed we've added and then subsequently deleted SNAP, child support paid, untaxed income, and high school, but we've also added high school completion and identity statement of educational purpose. We've also added and subtracted verification groups. At one point we had, we've used up to 6, not all at the same time. We've deleted now verifications groups 2, 3, and 6. So the regulations did as we intended and gave us some flexibility that we thought would help us respond to the needs of the programs. So for 17-18, the big highlight was that we did eliminate verification tracking group V6, which was the household resources verification tracking group. And you may remember that we had added that one kind of in response to concerns we had heard from the community and from others about people, how could they live on this type of income? And after a couple of years, it does take a little while for us to get the data to analyze with our lead time. We said that we were not getting, selecting people for this particular group was not giving the results that we had intended, and we decided we would eliminate that group. We also removed the 3 data elements I was talking about, the SNAP, the child support paid, and also the other untaxed income and benefits that were a part of that V6 group were also eliminated for 2017-18. And then I always like to do a resource slide for you. There looks like there are a lot of them there, but those are your resources that, I know you're still obviously into and kind of just in the middle of the 2018 school year. So these are resources that you may find helpful as you're completing verification for this particular award year. Moving on to 2018-19, we didn't make a lot of changes this year, which I'm sure you're glad to know and to hear about because we kind of needed a year that was a little calmer, right? We retained the same data elements, so no new ones, we didn't delete any, it's the same data elements. We didn't make any changes to verification tracking groups, and we made some fairly minor changes to acceptable documentation, which I'm going to talk about on the next slide. One of the key things is that the Internal Revenue Service, the IRS data retrieval tool, is available again, and I'll talk more about that in a few minutes, but yes, back up. We did also, one of the concerns we had early last year was, getting this confirmation of non-filing for individuals. And the thing we heard a lot about, prior to the problem was that you had a lot of dependent students. And that was kind of an unintended consequence. I think we decided that dependent students shouldn't have to get confirmation of non-filing for verification purposes. So we included that. Now, having said that, I'll remind you that parents of dependent students and independent students and spouses do, but dependent students do not have to get that. The little clarification that I mentioned on acceptable documentation, we clarified that applicants that are selected for V4 or V5 verification must submit an unexpired, valid, government-issued photo ID. And you may say, well, okay, isn't that what they always had to? Well, yes. The clarification was we sort of explained what we meant by government-issued, what government. And we said, well, the U.S. government, any one of the 50 states, a federally recognized American Indian and Alaska Native tribes, American Samoa, Guam, the Virgin Islands, the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands, Republic of Marshall Islands, the Federated States of Micronesia, and Puerto Rico. So those are the entities that we were talking about. So let's talk a little bit about this verification of non-filing. We got a lot of questions last year when this first came up about, well, what does that look like? What document do you get from the IRS that does this? And so we tried to be pretty expansive. So any IRS document that clearly indicates that the IRS does not have a tax record, return record on file for the tax year is acceptable for a verification of non-filing. And that includes things like the tax return transcript or a tax account transcript that indicates that there's no record of return filed or no transcript on file. Those are notations that we're aware of. There's also an IRS form 13873, and it can clearly state that the form is provided to the individual as verification of non-filing, or states again that they have no record of a tax return. It's also possible that there could be some other document out there that we haven't seen or heard of yet, and if you come across one of those, please let us know and we'll take a look at it. But basically, any IRS document that clearly indicates that they don't have a tax return record on file for that tax year would be acceptable. So hopefully this gives you a good listing of that. Now let's talk for a minute about verification for applicants who have been granted an IRS tax filing extension, right? Individuals who are granted only the automatic 6-month extension, which I know I took advantage of this year, they have to use the IRS DRT or submit an IRS tax return transcript. And you may say, well, why would that be? Well, that 6 months automatic extension expired in October. So anybody that's after that point, if an individual who has been granted a filing extension by the IRS beyond that automatic 6-month extension, they can submit the documentation for extension filers. But otherwise, most people who have been granted, well, the people who've been granted only that automated one should have filed their taxes by October 1st, or October 15th, I guess it was. And so they should be able to use the IRS DRT, or they should be able to get an IRS tax return transcript to be used for verification. There's another bullet here that talks about individuals that have been called up for active duty or for qualifying National Guard service. They can submit a statement certifying that they have not filed an income tax return or a request for filing extension because of that service. That's like a special circumstance. They also would be able to use that documentation requirements for extension filers. Another thing we did, really I think for the first time in our Dear Colleague letter this year, was we listed out what the requirements for verification are for individuals who are eligible for an Auto Zero EFC. Because we kept getting that question, exactly what do we have to verify if they're in a V1 or a V5, so I'll walk through that for you a little bit. If you've got a dependent student, what they have to verify is the parents' AGI, if they were tax filers, the income earned from work if they were non-tax filers, and if that individual has been placed in tracking group V5, the student would have to verify their high school completion status and their identity statement of educational purpose. And I'm just talking data elements here. The acceptable documentation is what's, what we've talked about before and in a little more detail. Now, for independent students who are eligible for an Auto Zero EFC, they have to verify these students and spouses' AGI if they are tax filers, the students and spouses' income earned from work if they were non-tax filers, and again, high school completion status and identity statement of educational purpose if they're placed in verification tracking group 5. And for these individuals also, they have to verify the number of household members, and that's to determine if the independent student has one or more dependents other than a spouse, because that makes a difference what formula is used for that particular student. And then for all Auto Zero EFC applicants, eligible applicants, it's possible that they're a V4. They were Auto Zero. So V4 only has to verify what? High school completion status and statement of educational purpose identity. So it's a streamlined thing. So they don't have to verify the income stuff, but they would always have to verify high school completion status and identity statement of educational purpose. So let's go through, just as a review of the data elements that have to be verified for 2018-19. We're looking at the 2016 income year, prior year. And this is for V1 and V5 groups. The income information that needs to be verified is AGI, U.S. income tax paid, untaxed portions of IRA distributions, untaxed portions of pensions, IRA deductions and payments, tax-exempt interest income, and education credits. For non-filers for V1 and V5, income earned from work, and again, they have to get the confirmation of non-filing status for the parents of dependent students, independent students, and their spouses. I just always want to point out, remember, notice, income earned from work only required to be verified for non-tax filers, not for tax filers. Number of household members has to be verified for people who are in groups V1 or in V5. Also, number in college for those same two groups. High school completion status if the student's placed in V4 or V5, and identity statement of educational purpose for people who are placed in V4 or V5. And here's your handy dandy slide so far, I'll say, for verification information for 2018-19 of resources that might be of assistance to you, which includes the Federal Register notice, the accompanying Dear Colleague letter, the suggested text is there, and then ICER guide, EDE technical reference. And then I also want to point your attention to the verification Q's and A's, which are found on IFAP by clicking on the Program Integrity Regulations section. It's up at the upper right-hand corner, I think. And then when you get into those particular Q's and A's, which live on the OPE website, scroll down to verification. We update those on a pretty regular basis. We try to keep those current. And so some of the hot topics and frequently asked questions you'll find there to help you. So now it's time for hot topics, right? So the IRS data retrieval tool for 17-18, as we know, it was suspended. And as a result of that, we issued Dear Colleague letter Gen 1704 back in April. We tried to take some corrective actions to alleviate the burden on institutions and on families and problems that you were experiencing. So what we said is that rather than using the DRT and rather than having to collect the tax return transcripts, you could get a signed paper copy of the 2015 IRS tax return rather than the DRT or getting the transcript. We also suspended the whole verification of non-filing issue. We said didn't have to get that either. Just get the signed statement certifying that the individual has not and is not required to file an income tax return, along with the list of the sources and amount of income from those sources that the family received. Also, you have to collect a copy of the IRS W-2 for each source of income for which there is a W-2. So, and as I said, that was Gen 1704. Now, for 2018-19, it was reinstated, and we're back up and running for the 2018-19 FAFSA processing year. And you know by now, there's been a lot of communications, and I'm not going to get into a lot of details because I'm sure other sessions will do that, but to enhance the security and privacy of the personal data, all the DRT data is going to be encrypted or masked and hidden from view on the websites listed, the DRT website, the FAFSA web pages, and on the student's individual student aid report that the student gets. However, your ICER and a state agency ICER will have the IRS data. Applicants and parents will not be able to make corrections to any of the IRS DRT transferred items before or after submission, with one little trick that I'll talk about in a minute. But institutions will be able to make any necessary corrections that occur. There's some new data field flags. It's a whole new set of flags, and they identify what, if any, information was changed. And there's separate flags for students and parents, and the flags listed for each field that can be transferred from the IRS to help you figure out what was transferred. Now, those are different flags from the IRS request flags. The request flag, the O2 still means that no data was changed and you're good to go for verification purposes. A couple of other things on the IRS data retrieval tool. The IRS has added a little additional security protection there. And basically, if a tax filer has used the IRS DRT, they're notified by the IRS that their personal information was used to access their tax return information through the IRS DRT, and if it was requested to be done so, was transferred to the Department of Education, and they don't have to do anything, but they're just letting them know. And I said, it reminds me of when, you know, I get little messages, it's like somebody signed onto your device. It's like, yes, that was me, or some of the other things. So it's an added security feature that we heard about and just wanted to flag. If you're not aware of it, people don't need to be concerned if they in fact did use the DRT. This is just the IRS making sure, hey, was that you? Yes, good, okay. Also, the IRS Get Transcript Online is unavailable for new users, and we issued an electronic announcement dated on November the 2nd about that. And in the meantime, just want to remind you that there's several other methods that somebody can use, including the Get IRS Transcript by Mail, that are available for individuals to use to get an IRS tax transcript. So I mentioned that I would kind of refer to this field flag again. So it's under the rollover portion. So if somebody has a rollover and they're using the IRS DRT for the first time, and they transfer a non-zero amount over into the untaxed pension or IRA distribution, right? They're going to get a question that says, did you have a rollover? Yes. How much was it? And the applicant will report that amount, and CPS will subtract it and use it as it should be in the formula. The field flag is going to be a to field that indicates that it was changed by the user prior to submission of the application. So to complete verification for this item, all we're asking you to do, because we know that they did the magic, is just to confirm, just get a confirmation, a signed statement saying that the untaxed pension or IRA distribution contained a rollover. So nothing more than that needs to be done, even though that is one item that was flagged. Also dealing with verification for amended tax returns. For the first time, students or parents who filed an amended tax return may use the IRS DRT. The request flag value they'll get back is an 07, but to complete verification, the institution has to obtain a signed copy of the 1040X, which is their amended tax return, and they use that in combination with one of the following, which is either an IRS tax return transcript or the IRS DRT information on the ICER record with all the tax information from the original tax return, because the information that's transferred is the amount from the original tax return. So you'll be able to use those two documents together to complete verification for those individuals. So tracking results for people who are in V4 or V5, it continues to be in effect for 2017-18 and also for 2018-19. And we still continue to have issues with people not reporting timely and accurately on this. So I really want to encourage you to do that. It's very, very helpful to us in our data analysis on these two tracking groups in particular. Remind you just need to select the proper award year when you're going in there, because there's more than one open. Be sure you're selecting the correct award year. There was a value 6, excuse me, added a year or so ago to the drop-down options, and that's the one that says, we attempted verification, there was problems with both the high school and the identity completion. So that's the value 6 that's been added. And I want to remind you that you need to report. These are the people who are in a verification tracking group of 4 or 5 and for whom you requested verification documentation. Don't include somebody you may have selected for like a V4 or V5 thing by your institution. Only the ones that were selected by the department. You're supposed to report these 60 days following your first request for verification documentation. And then you would update it within 30 days if something had changed. But it's really important that you keep on top of this particular reporting requirement for us. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Craig.
Thank you, Carney. Good morning. It's nice to be with you all again, old friends, and opportunity to make new friends in the profession. This morning, I'm going to talk specifically about identifying and resolving conflicting information, especially as it applies to comment codes 399 and for the 17-18 processing year, and the 400-401 comment codes for the 2018-19 processing cycle. As you know, among the list of standards of administrative capability is a requirement that institutions develop and apply an adequate system to identify and resolve discrepant information that they receive from students in making application for Title IV federal financial aid. Two relatively recent changes to our processes, the transition to using prior year income in support of early FAFSA, and more recently, the need to mask income and tax information obtained from the IRS using the data retrieval tool, have necessitated comment codes 399 and comment codes 400 and 401 to assist you in meeting the conflicting information standard of administrative capability. So comment code 399 was necessary due both to the 2016-17 and the 2017-18 FAFSAs using the same 2015 calendar year income and tax information as we transitioned to prior income with early FAFSA. This creates at least the possibility that that income and tax information could be different between the two FAFSA years, even though we expect that the information should be identical in most instances. And that creates a pretty obvious conflict of information, especially if that conflicting information could yield a significant change in the student's expected family contribution used to determine their eligibility for Title IV. The comment code, I think you know by now, is set only on the ICER transactions associated with the 2017-18 FAFSA and is not set for applicants not expected to be Pell Grant eligible on that processing year's ICER record, 2017-18. There are a number of conditions, of course, under which we would expect the income and tax information to, in fact, be different between the two FAFSA years, 2016-17 and 2017-18, and some of those reasons are displayed here. In order to minimize administrative effort in regards to comment code 399, we make a determination for institutions as to whether or not the conflicting information, income and tax information between the two FAFSA years would potentially yield a significant difference in eligibility for Title IV financial aid. It's important to note, however, that if the comment codes 399 does not exist, that institutions may assume that any differences that you may observe in income and tax information between those two FAFSA years is not significant, and you're not required to review or resolve those differences. There are also several other situations in which an institution receiving a 2017-18 ICER record with comment code 399 is not required to resolve the conflicting information. If your institution wasn't included on the student's 16-17 ICER record so that your institution didn't receive that information, of course, no conflicting information can exist for your school, though the comment code will still appear on the 2017-18 ICER record that you did receive. Or if you receive both the 16-17 and 17-18 ICER records, but you will not be dispersing Title IV aid on either ICER record. However, if you received both the 16-17 and 17-18 ICER records and the 17-18 record has comment code 399, the institution must resolve the conflicting information, even if you did not review or process the 16-17 ICER. The reason we're requiring this, of course, is the conflicting information resolution may still affect the 17-18 ICER that you do wish to pay on. For either or both FAFSA years, again 16-17 and 17-18, if the student or parent transferred information using the IRS data retrieval tool and didn't change any of the information, so the IRS request flag value is 02, or you had verified the 16-17 ICER, you may assume that the institutionally verified or the IRS data retrieval tool obtained transferred data values are correct for use in resolving conflicting information identified by the 399. If the resolution of the comment code would have been to make a correction to the 16-17 ICER record, and since that corrections deadline, published deadline of September 9th, 2017 has passed, the institution should document in the institution's record that this is why the correction was not made, and you may consider the 399 to be resolved. However, you may not disperse additional Title IV aid to a student until the 399 code is resolved. And if that 399 was set on the 17-18 ICER record prior to the close of 16-17 ICER correction cycle, and the institution is unable to resolve the conflict, for example, the student doesn't respond to your request for information but is still attending your institution for 17-18, presumably expecting you to consider them for financial aid, then the institution must consider the student to be in an overaward status if any need-based aid they did receive for 16-17. So they can't just not respond to you as a way of avoiding resolving the conflicting information that's presented by the 399. So for more information, we would refer you to the Dear Colleague letter and the electronic announcement that you see here if you have further questions about 399. So now let's turn our attention to a little bit about comment codes 400 and 401 as they apply to the 2018-19 ICERs. For 2017-18 and earlier, or I'm sorry, yeah, 2017-18 and earlier, of course, when we had certain edits in place that were performed while the applicant was still completing the FAFSA online. So if they gave us what appeared to be conflicting answers to questions, and we'll talk about that in a minute, we used to challenge those answers and say, hey, are you sure this is right? And ask the applicant to either reaffirm or, in some cases, go back and make corrections if they were mistakes. These edits, at least on the surface, appear to create conflict of information. So in order to bring the IRS data retrieval tool back, and I noted, Carney, that you got applause. I haven't gotten any applause yet. Oh, thanks. Oh, we're pleased that you're as pleased as we are for the IRS data retrieval tool to be back. But in order to bring that back, one of the things that we had to do was the information could no longer be displayed to the applicant when they're in the session or, as you know, on the student aid report. This created a problem for us that we couldn't put up those edits or those challenge questions as we have had in the past. So this caused us to create the comment codes 400 and 401. Comment code 400 simply is for the parents of dependent applicants, and comment code 401 is for dependent applicants as well as independent student applicants. And they are intended to alert you, the school, that information may be incorrect or inconsistent and that it must be reviewed by your institution. So we intended for these to be aids to you, to make it easier for you to identify and recognize conflicting information when we think there's a possibility that it could exist in keeping with the administrative capability requirements that I mentioned earlier. So there are 3 conditions for both parents and student information that can result in comment code 400-401. The first you see described before you on the screen. It looks like this on the paper version of the FAFSA. The parent or student reports being a tax filer. They use the IRS data retrieval tool, which returns an adjusted gross income of 0, but they report income earned from work as greater than 0. We know that there are scenarios where this can actually occur, but we also know that this is an indication of a high error rate. And so we're asking, because we could no longer challenge the applicant as to the accuracy of this particular scenario, we're asking you to look for it and resolve it when you see this comment code. Likewise, a second condition is for parents of dependent students, and again, it applies to the independent students as well. When the total of additional financial aid information fields reported on the FAFSA form is greater than the adjusted gross income transferred from the IRS. Again, those questions, I know it's kind of hard to see, but I know you're all familiar with, in the parents section, question 93A through F. You see those there. These are additional financial aid information fields that are then excluded from income. And so in the condition where the total of all of these additional financial aid information fields equals or is actually greater than AGI, it generates the comment code. And finally, the third condition that generates these codes is for parents, again, and students. Any item from the list of untaxed income on the FAFSA, this question's 94A through I, if any one of those items is equal to or exceeds the adjusted gross income, again transferred from the IRS using the data retrieval tool. And this is the question that you're familiar with, again, on the paper version of the form. So I'm not going to go through all of these, but this is the same codes for 401 exist. I'm going to flip through these. They're in the material. You can download the slide deck from the conference website and look at them at your leisure. But they're the same 3 conditions that I mentioned for parents. So I'm just going to click through these fairly quickly. We did include in our electronic announcement that there is a there is a comment code that can occur when none of the 3 conditions that I've mentioned exist. Once you have done your review of a comment code 400-401 and confirmed that none of the three conditions apply exactly as we've described them, then you simply need to note in your records, in your file, this is the case, and we do not expect you to take any further action. One thing I learned recently that's helpful, that may be helpful to you, especially as you're working through individual comment code 400-401s, is that you may use the FAA Access, which if you go into FAA Access and put in the individual student identifiers, you can actually generate the comment code condition, and it will tell you on the screen which of the three conditions were met, or if it is the condition that we mentioned as the special condition that you don't have to concern yourself with. So FAA Access might also help you as you're working through these. Hopefully none of you have large numbers of these, but okay, I gotta laugh. I gotta laugh.
Ah!
You got clapping, I got
You got to laugh. Well, you know,
Okay.
it's low, right?
Yes, that's right. So again, if you have questions about comment codes 400 and 401, you can refer to the electronic announcement we published in August 2017. See the link there. So both Carney and I, we're not going to take questions at this particular session, but both Carney and I will be participating in the open forums. I think there's one this afternoon, and again on Wednesday, and again on Thursday afternoons. Both Carney and I will be participating in those, and we invite you to raise your questions with us at that time. So we thank you for attending this general session. We're going to give you a few extra minutes back in your life, and enjoy the rest of the conference.